You are listening to OffPlanet Radio at offplanetradio.com.
Hello and welcome to OffPlanet TV. I'm Randy Moggins. It is OffPlanet TV for February the 3rd, 2016. We were away for a week due to illness on my part, and it's been a rather difficult time to move and get things done. It feels like, I don't know, the inertial pull of everything that's going on in the world around us right now has adopted a much heavier stance and a heavier footprint into our consciousness. And we're in acceleration mode now. Anybody that's listened to me for, well, as nearly as I can tell, the last 5 to 7 years knows that I said for a long time, we would hit the point where events would begin to speed up. Part of the shift that's been going on. It's a shift in consciousness, a shift in events. And unfortunately, like all shifts in a culture, in a civilization, on a planet, there are violent collisions of will, forces, and the agents of darkness that we are presently encountering. The events in the United States right now, obviously leading us to a place where we realize that we can't turn back anymore, that we are dealing with a system which has gone rogue, which has assimilated the culture of America and the government of America in such a way that we now have an incredible imposter at the helm. I want to take a minute here and talk a little bit about Lavoy Finicum and his murder. I will say his assassination with extreme prejudice at the hands of alleged FBI I don't even know what to say at this point. Are they FBI agents? Are any of these agents that we're talking about, can we prove who they were? Lavoy Finicum was shot 9 times by people who alleged to be federal agents. 9 times this man was shot in the snow, unarmed, according to the coroner's report. He was wounded from the front side. The shooter turned around, walked away, and then he was shot 8 more times by snipers in the trees. How do you account for that as a form of justice in America? Mr. Finicum and his associates were on their way to meet with officials at the behest of the sheriff of the county at the time that they were pulled over for what was called a routine traffic stop. Mr. Finicum got out of the car to attempt to deflect the gunfire that had been unleashed on the vehicle. And when he left the vehicle with his hands up, he was shot 9 times. We can no longer deal with the government, so-called in this country, as though they are the government. They are not the government. They are forces which have assimilated themselves into our country through color of law, through all of the art of law that has been crafted since the Civil War, since the passage of the 14th Amendment, and certainly since the time of the enactment of the DC Organic Act, which in fact incorporated a government imposter system. It resembled, but was no longer the same as the constitutionally organic government of the United States. I personally would hope that America could be taken back without one shot fired, but that's not possible anymore. And my hopes and my prayers are that the people will prevail, that we will not have another Waco, another Ruby Ridge, another horrendous shooting that takes the lives of multiple people in Oregon. And I would hope that saner heads will prevail and that law will prevail in this country, and that we can sit down and have a conversation about what constitutes a lawful government on the land of the United States. And I won't say more about it. It's an emotional issue. As I said, I would prefer this not be done with guns. I would prefer that this be done through reason and through the will of the people. But until you wake up out there and begin to deal with the forces who claim to be government in a manner to which they are deserving to be treated, which is as a presumed government entity system, accountable to law as corporations and not as living beings on the land, we have a problem and we have to begin to deal with it. To Mr. Finicum, I can only say rest in peace, and may your memory serve as a way for America to move forward without any additional bloodshed. And I want to welcome my guest tonight. He comes to us from outside the country right now, from Peru. And he is ensconced in his studio tonight, ready to sit down and talk. We've got a number of amazing subjects to talk about tonight. I want to welcome James McCanney to the program. James, welcome.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Randy. And regarding your introduction, this situation in Oregon has gotten so bizarre. The latest is that they have cleared out the reserve up there, the building of the original group that was there, protesting the government occupancy of that land. And of course, ultimately, we find out that Hillary Clinton had cut a deal when Secretary of State to sell the uranium in all of this area, and that's why they're burning, the BLM is out there burning these ranchers off their land, burning their houses down, and ultimately taking over this park reserve, which was supposedly for nature, to mine uranium. It was sold to a company in Canada called Uranium One, which is wholly owned by a Russian company. But anyway, now we find out they have put actors in the building, and they were going to stage a massive false flag shootout and say, now we got to disarm these crazy militia people. And we found that out because someone had trapped a feed off the internet where they were going in and actually having these people sign actors releases.
Yeah, I saw that video.
It's absolutely insane what's going on. And like you say, we don't even know who these people are, who they work for, who's directing this. They claimed they were FBI. They are unmarked vehicles. The only reason we have an association with the FBI is because the fire marshal up there ran a license plate on one of the vehicles a number of weeks ago, and it ran back as an FBI vehicle. But other than that, nobody knows who was at the shooting. It was not a roadside pullover for velocity or anything like that. There were dozens and dozens of vehicles at this site. And when they came around the corner where the final standoff took place, there were 3 vehicles nosed in at them on the highway, and there's no way they could get around. He pulled off the road into a snowbank, and then the shooting started. They had no way. They had women in the vehicle. They took over 100 shots on the vehicle itself, and miraculously, these other people lived through it. Mr. Finicum was shot in the back. He was shot apparently in the driver's seat while still in the driver's seat. When he got out to walk around, he had his hands up, and he got shot in the back. And then they shot him he was shot twice already, apparently another 7 shots after he was on the ground face down.
See,
insane.
James, we don't have a reliable news account of the events up there. Most of what we're getting right now, we have to call from alternative media, and unfortunately, we're also seeing where alternative media itself has been compromised in this, either by actors that have been planted inside of the alleged occupied compound, or the as the video you cited earlier, where they're asking for the actors' releases, they may even be here that these things are occurring. The FBI film, which was released, which claims to be unedited, wasn't unedited. I know video. I looked at it. The timeline doesn't make sense. There's bumps in the video. It's the best we can do to get an accounting of what happened, but it certainly isn't what I would call an accurate report. And it's very telling that they shot this man a total of 9 times, according to the coroner's report. I thought sharpshooters, by definition, were supposed to be accurate shooters, meaning the goal is to end a siege, not to have carnage on the ground and to leave a man bleed to death in the snow.
Well, yeah, but he was not armed. He shouldn't have been shot even once in the first place.
No.
This is absolute insanity. There's an interview of Cynthia Sharp, I believe her name, was one of the young ladies in the vehicle. It's an hour and a half interview with John Statmiller. I listened to that, and to listen to her account, her eyewitness account, being into the car, and they were down. At times they had 3 or 4 more laser beams on them, which meant that would be where a bullet would go. And when the shooting started, they were yelling at them to get out of this vehicle. They wouldn't do it. They fired some type of gas release into the vehicle. These people are screaming, "Please don't shoot." And over 100 rounds, they estimate, were shot into this vehicle with the people inside it, hunkered down, unarmed. Absolute insanity. Absolute insanity. This would not even pass in a war scenario.
No.
Where you, I mean, it's so insane what's going on here. And the agents that are up there, it just is absolute insanity. But we don't even know who's doing this.
No, we don't. No. There's no accurate accounting right now of the manpower on the ground. There doesn't seem to be any military authority to operate. The FBI and the BLM are operating on the presumption that they have the right to even own land in the first place. We come to learn from all of this, and it's something we've known for a long time, that apparently the so-called federal government owns as much as 3/4 of the land west of the Mississippi. And certainly in the west and southwest, where there's just millions of acres that have been occupied either by BLM land that's been taken, or very large military installations that don't meet constitutional muster for ports and forts under the organic constitution, which comes back to the issue of what this siege was really all about. It was an issue of the fact that the government constitutionally is not allowed to own land, and certainly not a corporation masquerading as the government, as we have now.
There's so many things that happen in government that they do. There's no checks and balances. There's no independent arm to say, hey, you don't have the ability to do this. You don't have the right. You don't have the statutes to back this up. There's so much corruption at all levels of government. We find that the local governor, the sheriff in that county, was an ex-BLM agent, and we're finding this all over the country, where local police agencies have gone off to Washington for Homeland Security training, and they are under oath that if there's a federal issue of some type, they no longer are your local police force. They are now federal agents.
Yes.
The sheriff was an ex-BLM agent. The governor, who I understand was not the elected governor of the state, is a buddy of Obama's. And we find political collusion down to the local level all over the country. The same thing that happened in Nevada. We later find out that Harry Reid was absorbing land into his own land from adjacent, by having somebody in the courthouse literally changing documents and bequeathing land to his. And then they finally ran, the Bundys were the last man standing when they made a stand. They were the last people to be there. If it weren't for that, we would not really know what happened in Nevada. A lot of collusion, and once again, it was for Harry Reid to build access to a military base or other things. I don't understand all of the issues there. But for politicians in Washington to cut backdoor deals regarding land that's adjacent to federally controlled land.
And that's an important point, federally controlled, because at this point, we've not been able to inspect land patents, actual deed. Okay, I guess we're back live. I guess we dropped off again. Nice guys jamming us out there. You think you're going to stop us? I don't think so. I don't know where we left off in all of that, James, but let me redirect again back to the subject that I think we kind of thought we'd talk about a little bit tonight. And that is restoring the United States back to a constitutional system where it is a lowercase u United States of America, a government where the states themselves are the sovereigns, and the so-called federal government largely serves as an ambassadorial function, handling certain higher level coordination between the several states, as it was termed back in the early days of the country. We no longer have the several states. What we have now is the United States as a corporation, which has amalgamated and subsumed all of the several states into them. And we talked about this on a previous show, and I'm just wondering if maybe we can dig in a little bit and get your thoughts on how we possibly begin to affect change in that direction.
Well, it comes down to banking. If you look at the federal government, who is the federal government? They represent the European Bank, the Rothschild Bank, which is the front agency for the Vatican. The Royal Bank of England is what we got away from during the Revolution. That's what it was all about. That's what the American Revolution was about. And it was not but a few years until they were back in after the Declaration. So I like to divide the Declaration of Independence, which is what I call my Constitution. And then the Constitution, you have to make a bit of a distinction there, because there was a lot of infiltration, and that's what they do. They infiltrate into the American Constitution. But the end result is that today, and of course, we all know what happened in 1913, the 100-year charter for the Federal Reserve Bank ended in 2013. It was a 100-year non-renewable charter. We're dealing with an entity that doesn't even have any right to exist. Their collection agency lives in Puerto Rico because of tax-free status. If they existed in a state, they would have to pay state tax of some kind, business tax or whatever. That's why the IRS is in Puerto Rico. And that's why the IRS, that's why the tax-free federal status maintains in Puerto Rico. This is so, but the problem here, let's go to a state like Utah. Utah now has legislation to take back all of its federally controlled lands and simply take it back. You have a state like Texas, where they every year have to vote to be a state in the union. You have a state like Oregon, where there's groups trying to move a portion of the state into independence. You have Vermont, New Hampshire, but it all comes back to banking. How are these states going to function if they're bumped out of the SWIFT system, the International Monetary Exchange Rate system? All of this is controlled by the central bank, the International Monetary Fund and the Central Bank of Europe. So let's look at what Russia did. Russia created its own SWIFT system so it can do international exchange with China, the BRICS nations, Venezuela, Bolivia, many other nations, Iran, and India, Brazil, etc., of course, the BRICS nations. But this is the core issue. So I was on an interview this morning, and somebody brought up Texas. I said, the governor of Texas, somebody's got to go up and pound on his door, and because the same issue is going on in the Red River in Texas.
Yes, it
BLM is down there trying to take over land on both sides, or in the north side of the Red River. Basically, these governors really don't know what to do. What they have to do is join another SWIFT system so they can have interstate commerce, so the credit cards work. All of these other things will function. They have to take over Social Security, other endowment funds, which are terribly, terribly expensive to be run at the federal level. and to take care of their own citizens, etc. But the governors have to stop playing golf and shooting traps and start getting down to business, which is the business of making their states and taking their states back for their citizenry. And that includes passports, by the way.
Exactly, yeah. And that actually is a good place to start, because the passport issue comes into this with an article that you recently put out on the Liberty Beacon that had to do with the fact that flights inside the United States are soon going to begin requiring passports issued by the State Department for people who do not have driver's licenses. And there are several states right now that are deficient in real ID compliance, and therefore their resident state driver's licenses are not considered legal ID under Homeland Security regulations. On top of that, it is apparent that the regulation's been in place for a long time for this. The IRS has announced that they will begin leaning travel privileges on passports for people who owe significant amounts of funds in overdue taxes and whatever to the IRS. So now,
or if they don't have a social security number, if they do not have a social security number, this is all creeping into the a transportation bill, the back door of a transportation bill.
So we're forced into a horrible situation. First off, there's no legal requirement for anybody in this country to have a social security card. I understand that government officials don't know that, but you can look it up. It's in the law itself. No one's required to have one. However, compliance now over the numerous generations since the institution of Social Security in the Roosevelt administration has made it a norm. So now it's a norm and they want to enforce it. The idea that we need to have all of this elaborate identification in order to travel inside of our own country should be repugnant to anybody. And the fact that the IRS is now an arbiter on when and where we can travel inside this country means that the banks are in control of our freedom of movement. Our basic rights as constitutional citizens have been taken away by the financial institutions.
And that right to travel would be extended to getting into your car and driving down to the grocery store to get groceries. And so, yeah, this is the foot in the door. The article I wrote deals with it's the Surface Transportation Reformation, Authorization and Reform Act of 2015. In section 32101, look, it's in section 32,101 in the back door of this transportation bill. That is where they put in the IRS mandate to remove your passport or federal ID if you don't have a social security number or if you owe back taxes. And like anything, that's the foot in the door. What most people don't realize is if somebody like, say, Donald Trump gets in and he goes, I want to recall the national debt and pay it off, then you're going to get a bill and everybody in this country is going to owe a lot more than what you could ever pay off. And literally, when I was a kid, let me tell you something, Randy, I was raised a Christian, and I always wondered, how could this race, this entire civilization of people become ensnared in this Babylonian captivity, in these other captivities? Now I know. It's happening right now. It's done through banking, through interest, through credit, then removing people's private property, which has happened, removing people's ability to move, indebting them, putting them in debt with national projects or wars, and then sending them the bill. This has happened before. This is not the first time this gig has gone down in history. That's what we're going into right now. And you have to, first of all, identify it, find out who's doing it, and look at it's the criminal element in Washington, this group of people representing themselves as the federal government.
People have argued that 9/11 changed everything. It certainly accelerated everything in terms of enlarging the scope of the government. There's simply no constitutional mandate at all for the creation of Homeland Security. But Homeland Security actually became the umbrella agency for what basically folded into it as this super enforcement agency, which uses the nomenclature of terrorism as a buzzword to get people to comply with things they otherwise wouldn't comply with on every level of our lives. Since 2001, we have seen an incredible movement to just take away every right we have to travel, to speak freely, to associate freely, the surveillance, the militarization of the police, the banking system lockdown itself. And then, you add to that the 2008, 2009 financial debacle and a greater lockdown on the banks. And we have a financial stranglehold now. The American people are rapidly leaning towards becoming certainly a second world, if not a third world nation economically, very rapidly, because we no longer have the ability to innovate, create, manufacture on our own shores. Everything has been outsourced.
The TPP, the Trans-Pacific Pact,
Right.
incorporated the other pacts that occurred previously under Clinton, et cetera, the North American Trade Agreement, the European Trade Agreement, and the Pacific Trade Agreement, localized these trade agreements around local continents. Now they've been branched together, and basically the guy in the US or the guy in, say, a South American worker or somebody in Africa or somebody in Europe has been dropped to a nickel an hour equality to the guy in China. So there's a world, there's the world of elite, and then there's the proletariat. And this is exactly what's going on. These agreements span international boundaries and governments. So the federal government, and I've seen this in many other third world countries, where they give away or sell natural resources like rivers, bodies of water, underground mineral resources to foreign corporations, get the money, it's divvied up between the government officials, they become fabulously wealthy, and the resources go to a foreign corporation that comes in and takes them without a penny, without a drop of anything going to the local people. And so this worldwide corruption is all spearheaded, a lot of it through the United States because of the military might, or the CIA, the ability to go in there, the thugs, to control the news media, etc. And the United States is now on this road in Oregon. They have blocked the roads, they've shut down the schools, they've shut off the internet, there's no communication, there's no cell phones, etc. And so this is a complete lockdown of an area, completely obliterating the rights of any people there. And this is just an example of what's going to happen in the rest of the country. But the state officials have the ability and the right and the obligation to come in and take control. But if you have a sheriff that's owned by the BLM, if you have a governor that's owned by Washington, then this is not going to happen.
When you look at the situation in Oregon, I can't help but believe that in a lot of ways, this is kind of a test bed for what would be a larger scale lockdown. It's almost like they're testing now to see what will take, what will we stand up to. And it even seems like the people up in Oregon, they're getting a very rapid education here, but they're really not completely informed as to what's happening in their own backyard right now. The media itself has successfully framed this as basically a bunch of lunatic militia freaks with guns who have come in and taken over a so-called federal building, and locked and loaded and are ready to shoot it out with the government, rather than looking at what actually happened in the background of this case with the Hammonds, which was basically the Hammonds were doing controlled burn on their own property to control certain types of vegetation, which obviously is a problem. They were fined repeatedly for controlled burns, while the BLM itself was doing wildfire burns that basically were bleeding off into other adjacent properties and causing a lot of damage. They were sentenced, and they were actually indicted and tried with under a maximum federal penalty of, I think, 5 to 10 years, which the judge in that case didn't want to enforce. They got a lighter sentence. Having served their time now, another judge has come in, a judge that was put into place there, and has said, no, we're going to pull you back in. You're going to serve your full sentence. So apparently we've suspended double jeopardy in this country as well. And these are the background issues that most people are not informed about when it comes to what really is going on in Oregon right now.
Well, I've seen videos of the BLM burning down ranches, and you see the fires coming across, and they go, yeah, there's the house going up, there's the barn, the cattle are being destroyed in the field. It's unbelievable, the savagery that's going on here, and these farmers are losing their livelihood, et cetera, these ranchers. But the underlying issue here is it's being done to satisfy a sale that occurred a number of years ago of the uranium that's under that property. So there's not going to be a wildlife sanctuary anymore. There's not going to be public lands. This is not going to be an area that anybody can use, because uranium mining, you have to dig up everything. It's a fine powder in the soil, and it has to be refined and then brought in. There's a lot of refining that has to go on. And so they're going to really destroy this entire area.
I am still recovering from bronchitis and a cold. Yeah, when it comes down to the greed factor, we look at our politicians now. Years ago it was said that U.S. presidents put their assets in a blind trust, which I think was kind of a hedge. But in modern times, what we just see is a bold grab now. All of our major politicians, the presidents, Congress, judges, retires very wealthy people, and nobody ever bothers to do the paper trail to find out how these people made their money. The courts themselves, James, operate as banks. Basically by monetizing all of the paperwork that goes through the bank into a back-end banking system, which feeds into the retirement accounts for the judges. Then we have judges who are basically being bribed to convict criminals to go into these private prison systems in the United States. Another travesty as well. So we have wealthy, corrupt people at every level of our governments. And when it comes to a situation like what we have in Oregon right now, we have no motivation by public officials to change anything because they profit from it all. So again, we have this juggernaut situation where we've got to go, how do we move through this? And the only thing that I can come up with is we have to get people informed, which, that's the point of this media that we're using, these platforms that we're using and writing articles and doing shows, is to try and inform people, because the mainstream media doesn't talk about this. What do you see as an effective way to push this platform forward in terms of organizing principles and a message that would be easy for people to receive at a base level?
Well, I've talked about this before, but basically what we've got here is the equivalent of a bad marriage. The spouse has run up the credit card, is on drugs, is drunk, beaten up the kids.
Yes.
You're going into rages, psychologically out of straight. You've tried to go on to counseling, it hasn't worked, and you don't want to walk out of your nice house or whatever. Treatment has not worked, so you have one thing to do, and that is to leave, and that's what the states have to do now with bringing in 500,000 refugees from Pakistan on top of the 500,000 they want to bring in from Syria. It's just the states have no place to go. They cannot weather the insanity that's coming at them from this thing called the federal government. The backdoor deals, the wars that are going on, the attrition of the state citizens to fight in these wars as cannon fodder, etc. It's insane. So the states have no other alternative but to turn away. The military that we have built to defend this country isn't even here. during 9/11. Where was the military that was supposed to protect? Hours went by and jets are flying into buildings and there's not a military plane in sight. We find out now Dick Cheney had a stand down order. Dick Cheney knew what was coming. He had stand down orders. They had the military jets all spent on other operations. They were out of fuel during this whole time. I mean, this was a setup operation. Dick Cheney should be in prison. This guy should go in prison that he would never ever see the light of day. I mean, he makes some of these mass murderers look like punk. But you know, the people running that operation in Washington are criminals. The government, the majority of senators, the vast majority, have signed an agreement to support Israel as top priority. And if they didn't sign it, they were run out of office. You know, the criminality that's going on and the people in control of what we call the federal government, the states have no other option than to move away. So what we got to do is work on the game plan for the states to break away. States are already doing things. They're resisting the Federal ID Act. They are Utah is passing legislation to take back all federal lands. Texas is on the verge of doing many things relative to federal, trying to keep the federal so-called authorities out of there. Arizona has already made multiple moves to move away, have been fighting over border control. And by the way, the issue with, say, immigration is part of this. So many things are being thrown at this country at the same time. There's a solution. It'd be far cheaper than trying to build a wall like Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump building this massive wall around Texas. I mean, take that money, give these people, the Mexicans, good jobs in Mexico. They all go back there. I know these people. I speak the language. You know, they don't want to be in the United States. The vast majority of them would go back to Mexico in a heartdrop if they could, if they had something to go to. But Mexico is a country whose political scene has been totally corrupted by American politics over the last 50 years. And 5% of the people or 2% of the people own 95% of the wealth. You know, Mexico is not a poor country. It's a vastly wealthy country. It's just that a few people have the wealth and everybody else lives in the dirt.
Yeah, so if America wants to see its future, look south of the border, because they are what we are about to become in this country. And the immigration issues, well, this is just conquest by marginalizing our native population. I mean, we don't have an immigration policy anymore. What we have is people who are either forced to cross borders or shipped in such a manner that they are basically dumped into the main of the population. I think the United States has traditionally been a country that has embraced the immigrant. The immigrants have embraced America. I grew up in the 60s and 70s in neighborhoods where my friends were Italians and Polish people, and there was just a rich blend of communities. I mean, different languages were spoken in these communities, and yet at the same time, they were Americans. They understood that. I mean, me growing up, I lived in an area where there were the steel mills and there was a vibrant industry here, and people came from all over to aspire to a lifestyle. That's all gone now. There's nothing here. The immigrants that come in now are clients of the welfare state. The welfare state, in turn, has bled the middle class off to the point where the middle class now are clients of the welfare state as well. So what happens in this country is the few left in this light little wedge of middle class are left supporting the people both on the upper strata and the lower strata until the middle class doesn't exist anymore. And that was the goal of Marxism many years ago.
Yeah, that was the goal all along, and we're nigh there. We're at that point. So, but what's the solution? Actually, there is a solution, and the states have to simply break away from this federal monstrosity. And the first state to go is going to be difficult. But
I think
that's
it's gonna
why
be Texas, frankly.
I think it's going to be Texas too. And that's why the governor there has to get his act together,
He does.
set up a banking system. North Dakota already has an independent banking system. Oddly enough, I have said the governor of Minnesota, Mark Dayton, was a senator. He stepped up one day, closed his office, and says, "I'm leaving Washington." He went and became the governor of Minnesota, where he was raised, a resident. But he said, "I can't deal with Washington anymore. The corruption is so great here, it can never be cured." And he got up and left. So you have people like that. But oddly enough, Minnesota and Wisconsin, look at them. They're in the center of the country. They both have international seaports, two of them.
Yes.
Duluth Superior, and then Minneapolis St. Paul has an international seaport down the Mississippi River all the way to New Orleans. These states could easily become independent. They're energy independent. Minnesota gets its primarily 90% of its oil products from Canada, does not depend at all on Mideast oil at all, gets a lot of electric from hydro from Canada, and has its own fleet of nuclear power, which I don't exactly agree with. But those are states that could easily become independent. They would save so much money by cutting off the federal government and managing their own programs like Social Security and programs for the elderly and healthcare and you name it, programs that are disastrous economically for the states, and dump the federal debt. Hey, goodbye federal debt. Adios, amigo. It's all funny money, and it was all created to enslave these people.
Yeah.
It's a good deal.
The adhesion contracts that they allege exist to tie us, the citizens, and I don't even like that word because that word has been attached to federal, and this term citizen itself is rather problematic. But the concept that we are tied intrinsically to this, quote, national debt. I mean, I remember hearing about this even as a young person and thinking, what is this debt and who do we owe it to and how did I get into this? I mean, I've tried to live most of my life as debt-free as possible. I don't even like car payments. But it seems like now we are tied with this monster debt load at every level, and that somehow liquidate the federal system would require us to be responsible for carrying a debt load that you have the numbers. You know what the numbers are per capita on the individual share of the debt load. Tell the listeners that number.
Well, that was part of my short write-up on the Surface Transportation Authorization and Reform Act of 2015. That most people would say, well, I don't owe any back taxes. Well, you're absolutely wrong. You just haven't been sent the bill yet. But if you take, these are round numbers, say a $20 trillion national debt, and you take 300 million people in this country, that turns over $250,000 per person. But not all these people are tax-paying individuals. When you actually take out the number of people who are what you might call tax-paying brackets, it raises it up to about $650,000 per person. And this is growing every day. A lot of people don't realize that if you pay tax to the federal government, that money does not go to the federal government. It goes to pay the interest on the national debt, and then they in turn create bonds and loan that to the federal government to operate, usually running out of money around September or October. Now in the year, and then this object called the debt ceiling, they have to raise it. The United States corporation gets a rating just like a corporation, and they go, yeah, we'll give you some more money, but I think you have to start this war over here in Syria, or you need to, all of this issue with Syria, etc. And by the way, the refugees coming from Syria, 50% of them are not even from Syria.
Right.
They're ISIS. They're being planted into this country to cause havoc. But the game that's being played here and the shroud that's being played on this country, the only thing the states can do is break away and get out of that bad marriage. And it's going to start once the first one goes. then it's going to be like dominoes. That's why they're up in Oregon. They're very afraid because these people have had it up to here with the federal government. They just shot a guy dead in the back out in the stretch of road where they set up a old West style ambush with full intention of killing everybody in that vehicle. And it's a miracle that those people in that vehicle weathered hundreds of shots into the vehicle and were not dead. One person got hit, I believe, actually took a bullet. Absolute insanity. And we don't even know who these people are. Obviously, they were from some federal controlled agents. They were Americans. I mean, the people talked to them. One guy was from Chicago. They might be your next door neighbor. You know, up there in, you know, in uniform, not even knowing who they're working for. They're just told to sit out here in the bushes and ambush these people and shoot them. And that's what they did. All of those people, hundreds of rounds from dozens, we don't even know how many people hiding in the trees, waiting to ambush these people as they came around that corner. Insanity. This is absolute insanity. And the guy gets out, has his arms up as he's walking away, and he gets shot in the back.
Yeah. We don't, you know, honestly, I can't find the mandate for even having a Federal Bureau of Investigation in the Constitution. There's certainly no BLM in there. There's none of these alphabet soup agencies that I can find in the original Constitution. The original federal government didn't have all of these offices. As nearly as I can tell, they're functionaries of the 14th Amendment and what came after it, and the establishment of a government structure that was basically beginning to build into what was allegedly the 10 square mile federal zone, and then began to expand outward. But when we look at these agents on the ground, I still have not been able to determine what their area of authority is. The FBI traditionally dealt in issues that were very well defined by the federal statutes, which again is not constitutional law, it's statutory law, it's special law that was applied to, quote, the corporation. So how do we get to the place where nobody bothers to challenge the primacy of federal agents on the ground as interacting with citizens?
Oh, it's yeah. There's no precedent. It's just people doing whatever they want to do. For example, federal mandates on water. This is a huge issue where the water rights of cities, municipalities have been taken over by the federal government. Clinton did something. I mean, I know quite a bit about this. So this is an example. During the Clinton administration, Billy is not the sharpest bulb on the or knife in the knife block there, but for some reason he put a mandate out that all of the levels of arsenic the federal level of allowable arsenic in water systems should be dropped by about a factor of 3. Yeah. Which these people have been drinking this water forever. Why is the magical number right now? Well, they had already gone around, and this is one of my objections against scientists. They collect the data that then is used by the government to do these obtuse actions against the citizenry. And so what he said is, I'm going to set this level of arsenic, and if your city water doesn't comply, we're going to take it over at the federal government level. Well, this came out of the UN. And it's not like Billy knew what arsenic even was. He knew what other white powders were, but not exactly arsenic or what levels in water should be. But this is a way they manipulated using scientific information to literally take over 65% of the nation's water municipal supplies and take control of them. And if you noticed, during the Clinton administration, your water bill went way up.
Oh, yeah.
That's why.
Since we veered into this subject, and it is timely, I have this article here. I'm going to read just a blurb from this. The article says, read what the professor who helped expose the Flint water scandal said about science and academia in 2016. And the quote here is, this is Virginia Tech professor Mark Edwards. It was the injustice of it all, and that the very agencies that were paid to protect these residents from lead in water knew or should have known after June, at the very latest of this year, the federal law was not being followed in Flint, and that these children and residents were not being protected, and the extent to which they went to cover up exposes a new level of arrogance and uncaring that I have never encountered. This is Virginia Tech Professor Mark Edwards exposing the toxic levels of lead in the water in Flint, Michigan. Again, science, as you and Dr. David Lewis discussed on Roger's show earlier tonight, and listeners, go look that show up because that's well worth watching. Everything about our culture has been bastardized. The government has bought out and sold our scientific community. They've co-opted academia. They have folded into their black science groups all the legitimate scientists with any high-level skills, and they have hidden from public disclosure the most salient facts about things like our own water and air quality safety.
Absolutely correct. And Dr. David Lewis, who is a co-guest with me, that's the topic we were covering there. And it's so important because at the core of literally everything going on today is science. You know, scientists develop, they go out and gather information. This information goes back. They don't even know what it's used for. Scientists do not control their science. It is owned by somebody besides them. I don't publish in peer-reviewed journals. I did when I was at Cornell in 1979. I had some papers published in peer-reviewed astrophysics journals, but I refuse now to submit any of my work to peer-reviewed journals because they own it. You have to ask permission to refer to or publish or discuss your own work.
Yes.
I don't deal with that anymore. I'm an independent scientist. I fund my own research. I have my radio show. I have my audience. I sell my books. I sell the water filters, various other things, which keeps me operating. But I don't take government money. I never did. I never signed any contracts with the government. I've been in very high places. I've been in meetings with military over aerospace issues, but never in my life have I compromised myself to sign a contract. And now I'm very proud of the fact that I have weathered all of these decades as an independent scientist. I have seen so many people go by the wayside in my career. And believe me, what I have done is not easy. It took a lot of fortitude, you know, to keep doing what I'm doing. But now it's, you know, all of these people, I wish there were more people that had stayed with the program and become independent scientists. A long time ago, there was no government science. When Eisenhower left office, that's when government-supported science really came into vogue. Prior to that, university scientists had to find their own, like squirrels in the forest. They had to go out and find the nuts so that they could do research.
Well, it looks to me like the Manhattan Project was probably the template for the government co-opting science. Everything after that, they enacted the National Security Act, which enabled them to encumber many things, not the least of which is science, under these uber secret non-disclosure agreements, secret black ops projects, and science itself came under this dark cloak of development under tight government controls. And people like you, people of ability, were pulled into these programs, and then all of their research was basically shut down whenever it was leaked out or it was co-opted by the government and militarized for their own purposes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I gave the example in 1991, NASA had an overhaul. They were completely shut down. People that remained had to sign non-disclosure agreements. They couldn't go out to the press and say, oh, well, I discovered this or I'm studying this. Everything had to go through public press release agencies. One was at JPL, the other one was at Goddard. And you find these same agents doing and putting their stamp on NASA news stories, and they always have the same twist. There has to be a certain political correctness to everything that is said. And it was actually humorous a number of years ago. Scientists dealing with this topic of global warming came out and said, hey, our studies are being co-opted. They're being sidetracked or rewritten and then presented to the public, and they were complaining about it. And I said, hey, boys and girls, that's what you do. You work for the government. You don't work for you. What do you think you are? You have sold your soul to this entity that controls you and everything you do. So what do you complaining about?
Basically a Politburo that now controls all of the government-created science. We're coming up on a break here, James, and before we go to that, since we talked a little bit about the water in Flint, Michigan, it's important to note that we all have to take precautions. We have to take preventative measures. We have to begin looking out for our own health and our own safety when it comes, especially to things environmentally. James, you market some water filters that I happen to think are just superb. Talk a little bit about them. And I've got a unit here. I'll put this up for people to look at as you're talking a little bit about the development of your water filters.
Yeah, there is the main stainless steel unit. That's what you might call the best-selling unit we have. Inside of, do you have does it have any of the elements inside there, Randy?
I do not have the elements inside of it, but I do have one sitting right here that we can
there we go. Yeah, take it back a little bit from the camera. There we go. There we go. That's what goes inside these white, we call them candles, but they're ceramic filter elements that go inside that stainless steel case. It's very simple. You pour the water in the top container. It filters through that filter element by gravity and drips into the bottom container. And it's for your kitchen. Take it on an emergency. For travel, there's a smaller model that's great for travel. But at any rate, yeah, these are on my webpage. Give my webpage out here, jmccsci.com. And these filter elements are the latest, greatest. They take out the heavy metals, lead, pharmaceuticals, phytochemicals, the organic chemicals, etc., arsenic, fluoride, everything. That's all in that one
right there. Arsenic and fluoride. I want to point out that there are water filter systems out there that major manufacturers who are not providing out-of-the-box protection from arsenic and fluoride. These filters do. These are the filters we are using in my house now. And the design aspect of this, I like the hemispheric design on the top of it. Some of the water filters out there have a flat cap design on top. This actually allows a little bit more saturation of the water towards the top of the filter. So these are superb units. Again, these are stainless steel units. And we get a good look at it that way. They're actually nice. They look nice in the kitchen.
Yeah, it's a very high quality unit. It's something that you're going to have for decades, if not maybe the next century. And the filter elements last a long time. They're industrial grade. They're meant to take out all of the problems that we have in water today. Anyway, that's more described on my webpage, but thanks, Randy, for showing that.
I wanted to share that. I've been using gravity feed water filters for about a decade. And so I'm somewhat qualified to say that these units are definitely up to spec and they're definitely high quality. We need to take care of this stuff, folks. The water that you feed your children, your pets, that you cook with, water your plants with, the cost for a water filter is so small compared to the benefit of getting these toxins out of our system. So we have a project coming very soon. We're going to talk about this in cooperation with the Liberty Beacon, where we will make these products available to you. So with that, we're going to take a break. When we come back on the other side, we're going to go into what we really set out to talk about tonight. And that's going to be the Nazca and Palpa lines in Peru and the mysteries of this, well, it looks like something from OffPlanet. We'll do that and more when we come back on the other side. This is OffPlanet TV. I'm Randy Moggins. We will be right back.
Felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulder. Pressure to break or retreat at every turn. facing the fear that the truth I discover. No telling how all this will work out, but I've come too far to go back now.
Welcome back to the second segment of Off-Planet TV for February the 3rd, 2016. Well, at least it isn't on this side of the date line anyway. In Europe, where we're broadcasting from, it's already tomorrow. It's funny how that works, isn't it? Welcome back. I'm Randy Moggins. This is Off-Planet TV. My guest with me tonight is Professor James McCanney. And the subject that originally was the seed for this program, I didn't know, by the way, James, that you were going to be on the previous hour with Roger Landry. So you are now into the third hour of broadcasting live TV tonight. So my congratulations on your endurance, because I tend to burn out after 2 hours, but welcome back.
Thank you. No, I'm doing fine. Still full of energy here.
Yeah, I see that. I'm edgy. I'm all over the place. I guess I'm kind of excited about the topic we're going to talk about. The last hour, we sort of drove around the big ranch and discussed politics and government issues, and that's important stuff as well. This hour, we're going to talk about, James sent me his latest publication, The Nazca and Palpa Lines Peru Mystery Solved, Ancient Interferometer Fractal Antenna Complex. Now, I'd heard about these Nazca lines many years ago. I don't keep up with all of this, but we have all these sites all over the planet that we can't explain. Lines that are in the earth that look like grids. Obviously, we've got the megalithic sites that have been uncovered and are still being uncovered. And we're discovering how little we actually know about our own planet and our own past history, because discoveries like this seem to lead us to believe that we are not the most advanced race that's ever been on this planet. In fact, we may be one of the most recalcitrant in terms of developing technology, because when you look at what's going on in Peru with this grid, you get a sense of just being completely overwhelmed by the scale of this technology. You're presently living in Peru. Can you give us a little bit of the background of your involvement with Peru and where you're at and how you came upon working through the mystery at hand, which is the Nazca Lines?
Well, the issue of being in Peru at all came from what I call the wing generator. It's one of my projects coming to fruition, commercialization. It's a new, very highly efficient system for extracting energy from the wind. And so anyway, I'm there in the sense of scoping out the market and working the market in Peru, because it's a developing country. It doesn't have a lot of money to put into energy like nuclear or solar or the current three-blade wind generators, which really don't work. And so what I have, the wing generator, is ripe for this country. And so because they have developing industry, et cetera. So anyway, the point is, that's why I was there. So of course I visited Machu Picchu and in the Inca ruins and as a tourist somewhat, and ended up in this location called Nazca. And so at any rate, on the picture here, the people can see one of the more famous Nazca lines called, this is, of course, looks like a monkey, and it represents a monkey. But in this region of Peru, it's very dry, altiplano, not really altiplano, it's the Pampas. And it very, very dry. It's the second driest place on Earth. And so there's really not monkeys there. There's one of these line structures that is of a spider that only occurs 1,500 kilometers away in the central Amazonian jungle. So anyway, I visited these as a tourist, and then I came back and I revisited a second time. But the second time I had time to look at these pictures and got some more data and interest, et cetera. But now I went to the actual location, which is a couple hundred square kilometers area covered with these figures. Now imagine this figure here is the size of a number of football fields. This is very large, and these are drawn on the ground. And the way they're constructed is they simply remove these red iron nickel rich rocks and move them out of the paths. But as you can see, the lines are extremely straight, etc. And so anyway, in the middle of this plain, which is not a perfect plain, it's not perfectly flat. By the way, here's a picture that comes from South Africa. They're known as the black spirals. But a similar type of situation where you have spiral drawings in the, and those are created in the same manner by moving rocks that are one color out of the path and then creating these patterns. So they're only visible from outer space. They're really not visible, although some scholars say, oh, no, you can see them. You really can't understand the immensity and the complexity of these from the ground or from nearby mountains. So anyway, I'm at the Nazca site. I'm up on a hillside overlooking the Nazca plains and the figures out there, etc. And all of a sudden I realized that all of these complex line patterns have straight lines that come together and they meet at the top of these mounds. One of my other areas of expertise is in atmospheric electricity. And I'm going, oh my goodness, these people were gathering atmospheric electricity and sending it out into these patterns. Here's a picture of Maria Reich in her, this is the museum. That's not really her, of course, because she died in 99. But this is a mock-up of her museum room there at the Nazca Plains with all her drawings and measurements. Here's pictures of a few other, there's the condor. To the right is the spider. That's the one I was talking about. The species of spider only occurs in the Amazonian jungle 1,500 kilometers away. So whoever did these, or whatever entity created these line patterns, it was not some entity, indigenous group of people who happened to live on the hillside next to here who had a few extra hours on their hands one day. And that's what modern archaeology has promoted as the authors of these lines. And so I'm on the site, I'm looking at these, I'm up on the mounds where the lines come together, and these are atmospheric collection sites for atmospheric electricity. And I'm going, what are these people doing? They're sending atmospheric electricity, which is a vast, if you know how to do it, there's a tremendous amount of power there, because this is what Tesla was doing. Part of my research during my career was understanding what Tesla was doing. He was actually gathering electric energy from the atmosphere. And so what my research showed was, where did this energy come from, how it's related to the solar electric field and translates into Earth's vertical electric field, etc. But anyway, these ancient people were gathering very large amounts of atmospheric electricity and sending them out along these patterns. And then I looked at the patterns, and I'm spent 25 years of my career in the telecommunications industry, and I'm an expert in antenna design. And I look at these and I go, oh my goodness, these are fractal antennas. Not only are they fractal antennas, but they're united in very complex fashion into interferometers. And we'll talk about what all this means.
Yeah.
But fractal antennas, for example, in your cell phone or your tablet, are small, compact antenna designs which are meant to be very powerful. They have as much receiving and transmitting power as a big antenna, but because of their spatial design, they are miniaturized. So this is a fractal antenna.
Explain the concept of fractal antennas versus, most of us are familiar, for instance, with, I guess, the antenna on our car, which is a unipole antenna. And then we have dipole antennas. And then we have parabolic antenna as well. The quantum antenna is technology that we now see in mobile phone technology. And I'm thinking that that's probably what's being used even in laptops that are using Bluetooth devices, much like this device I'm using right here to monitor my sound tonight. So correct. A little bit of maybe background on antenna design here.
Well, after World War II, and radio technology was advanced greatly during World War II, and then antennas, it's really a strange, bizarre aspect of electromagnetic theory. There's no rules or regulations. It's just what works, and people many times experimented It's almost like designing an airplane wing. It's like through a lot of experimentation. But if you can, show us that monkey picture from the very first one, Randy.
Yeah, I'm trying to scroll back through these as I go. They're different.
But anyway, to explain what a fractal antenna is, let's start at the bottom here and let's look at this long straight line that goes through the monkey's arms. See, that's a dipole antenna, just a straight antenna. Now come off the lower side of that and you see the zigzag pattern. That's a broken dipole. That's the first stage of fractal antenna. That would be, you're taking something that's long. Now, if you took that zigzag line and stretched it out, it would be much longer. But what you do is you break it into pieces and make it into that zigzag shape, and it has the same collection power as a long one. Now, you look down at the bottom, there's another one, there's another zigzag pattern, but then off in front of the monkey is this big grid that goes back and forth in a rectangular grid. These are classic fractal antenna designs. The monkey tail, which is a spiral, goes in and then it comes back out, is another standard, very representative fractal antenna design. So what I realized was that they were gathering, this is a picture now of one of the designs on the ground. You can see the little trough that was carved out in all the rocks are removed from this pattern, but very precise. This wasn't just a few people out there that like to draw pretty pictures in the sand. These are fractal antennas, and they're driven by atmospheric electricity, which is very powerful because this is an antenna complex that covers hundreds of square kilometers of surface of the planet. And there's only one reason for building these, and that is to signal to other star systems. There is only one reason for these. It's not to signal some other place on Earth. It's not to signal near space even. It's not to signal something that's orbiting. These are meant, the size and complexity of these. Now, let's talk about interferometers because of fractal antennas, the ability to compress an antenna into a small area. But these are big. So imagine taking the size of antenna in your cell phone, let's say, and making it the size of your hand. Well, that's about the scale here. So now imagine taking this monkey and his fractal antennas associated and make it into the full-size antenna that it would be if it were a full-size antenna. These are enormous antennas with tremendous signaling power. And there's hundreds of these figures out there. Some of them are more fractal than others, but someone left these. I come to the conclusion after studying this for a while. The release of my paper was December 31st of 2015, so just a number of weeks ago. But I made this discovery in December, and it took me a number of weeks to put the paper together. Then I announced it and I did the release. But here's the thing about fractal antennas. As modern so-called advanced civilization, we have only come to understand and use fractal antennas in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So remember the flip phones or the little other phones, you pull out the little dipole antenna and talk. Yeah. Well, you know, unless you're really young, you probably don't remember those. But that's in the last 10 years. Now we have the fractal antennas in telephones, et cetera. So whoever did this 5, 10, or 15,000 years ago knew about fractal antenna design. There are hundreds of dipole antennas in this complex. And I have a diagram that's also in the paper. I'm not sure if you have a picture of that. It's a white map with lots and lots of lines. But anyway, there's a good example of the complex at the Nazca Plains. And by the way, Palpa is just north of there. But all of these you can see over on the left-hand side. What we're looking at here is the monkey. You can see that up straight up from him is the hummingbird. There are whales. There are herons. There are pictures of seaweed. There are pictures of trees. There are just fractal. And then there's this guy, this picture. Excuse me.
Sorry, that slides occasionally because there we go.
Yeah. But anyway, this is, now you see the straight lines here. Now what happens is these figures are all collected by these straight lines on these mounts where the atmospheric electricity was driven out into this antenna complex. Randy, you showed a picture of the VLA, the Very Large Array Antenna out in the desert of New Mexico. Let's go back a couple here.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like I said, locating the individual slides is a bit challenging.
Oh, okay. Well, let's look at this one right here. Oh, here we go. Here we go.
Here we go.
Here's a modern antenna complex. This is called an interferometer. Now, the idea here is let's look at one of these individual antennas, 75 feet across. They're big, massive antennas, and they all have pointing ability to all point, and they're all pointing in the same direction. But the philosophy, the theory here of an interferometer is that if you had to build an antenna as big as this complete Y, that would be a big, big project. But if you take and put a pattern of these out like this Y, there we go, that's the complex.
Yeah,
but I'll leave this one up for just a second. If you had to build an antenna that had the capability of this Y, it would be as big as the Y itself. So you can see that would be a massive antenna. But you get the same resolution as that massively big antenna by making all of these small antennas and then hooking them all together and driving them back to a data center where the data is all interpreted. So it's a way of making a big, big antenna.
What kind of data, for instance, is this large array in Arizona? What exactly is this? Let me pull that back up there. What exactly is this collecting data regarding?
Okay, now they have the ability to zone in on any frequency in the radio spectrum with these telescopes. Mm-hmm. But they may, for example, concentrate on the water frequency, which is 15, 20 megahertz. And that's a common frequency that's seen in outer space. And like they sometimes look for that, thinking that might be associated with life or something. That's an example.
Right. So it's almost like a SETI project.
Yes, but exactly. But these could be used to examine, say, a radio galaxy or a quasar or other
pulsars, yeah,
pulsars, etc., in outer space. And so they're used for research to, look at that particular aspect of the electromagnetic spectrum. And you can see it's out on a big plane, just like Nazca is, because they want a nice plane where they can move these things around, etc. And these are directional. Now, if you look at, so the whole concept here is you hook together all of these smaller antennas. Now, here's a diagram of the Nazca planes, and the red markings here are the individual. You can see the hummingbird and the spider and the various, here's the monkey down here below. So the actual figures are just marked in because they're on this scale, they're relatively small. You can see Highway 89 here, which is the Pan American Highway, coming up from the lower right. You can see it kind of coming up at a diagonal and takes a turn there. And the Palpa complex is just north of here. But all of those lines are dipole antennas. And these are what you call cross dipole antennas. They're joined together. And when you cross dipole antennas, you get a different signaling pattern and direction. You get lobes, etc. It's frequency dependent. It's dependent on other factors, but and depending on which ones. Now, I've also discovered that they had the ability to connect and disconnect some of these antennas into the power structure, and so they could choose. Select various antennas, so that would give different directional.
So that's what I was going to ask you. So basically, they were able to switch antennas in and out of the array.
Correct.
Okay.
And also the other thing is, say, like the monkey would have a very specific set of overtones. Like when you play a middle G note on a piano and you play that same note with a flute, you go, oh, well, that's the flute and that's the piano. That's right. Because of the overtones of that specific instrument. And so the same is true with the Nazca antenna complex. The monkey has its own set of overtones. So when you drive that antenna and in concert with other antennas there, you can tell if you're on another star system that that's where it's coming from because of the overtones. This is very complex.
These forms, these animals, the monkey, the whale, the heron, is this an accident? Were the design of the antenna waves modeled after actual animals, or is there a morphological aspect to this?
My belief is if this were strictly utilitarian, they would not have built the monkeys and the herons and the whales and the seaweed.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, how did the Incas or pre-Incas, not even the pre-Incas, the pre-Incas, know about seaweed? Because there's no indication they were even seafaring at all. You know, about whales, they had two different types of whales. They had the killer whale and then another type of whale in the complex. Or the spider, which comes from the middle of the Amazonian jungle, 1,500 kilometers away.
I wish I had this spider because I would like to pull this up, and I don't think we have that in a frame, but I'll see if I can find it. We'll come back to it. We'll clip that. The spider is very interesting. It reminded me of something. About 5 years ago, I did an on-air symposium with a group of scientists and an English nobleman named Nigel Kerner. He has written a number of books that have to do with extraterrestrial abductions. And in his book, Gray Aliens and the Harvesting of Souls, Nigel has a diagram in there that shows a human being in a posture of prayer, if you can imagine that. And he maps a parabolic antenna over this figure. And he's discussing, some other issues. My point being that I had up until that point never thought about the energetics of our own spinal column, our skeletal structure, and how that is an energetic array that would communicate in what we call prayer energetically. And when I was looking at the pictures of all, I was just stunned by there's just a very slight overlap there in terms of our morphological structure, our skeletal structure, and the energetic system of our bodies. And when I was looking at these structures, I'm thinking, okay, this is interesting. This is not an accident. There's something else going on here. Frequencies.
Right. And directional, it's hard to, and here's the thing, and of course I talk about this in the white paper, is building a model. First of all, we don't have good topographic information of this area. It's very poor. There is some satellite data, but it's very poor. And then to understand the logistics of the layout of this area, and then to build a 3D model and first run some computer simulations. But as we know from antenna design, computer simulations really don't get you, especially something this complex. I could take 100 antenna specialists from around the world, the top 100 antenna specialists, bring them in, set them down and say, we're going to study this. And I guarantee you, we could not figure out exactly what they were doing here. This is going to take a lot of modeling to bring these in one at a time, two at a time, five at a time, like playing chords on a piano, bringing in some of the dipoles at the same time as the monkey and the heron, in trying to understand the various directional lobes. And then at the very end of the paper, I have a very simple cross dipole antenna example in the various lobe patterns, which are frequency dependent. So there's frequencies that are in natural atmospheric lightning and electricity. And so these would be transmitted out amongst this antenna complex. But very complicated.
Now, this obviously goes into some issues as well that play into, I won't call it free energy, I'll call it freely available energy. In terms of atmospheric energy, and which of course you talked about earlier, Tesla and what he was doing. But looking at these designs, it appears as though these ancients understood that the Earth itself was a gigantic electrical conduction system. Is that a fair way to put it? I'm sure there's a more elegant term that I'm not grasping right now.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And what's odd about this whole thing, I was not at the Nazca Plains to discover anything. I was there as a tourist when it all hit me, when I'm on top of this mound and I'm going, look at all these lines coming up to where I'm at. And this is an atmospheric collection site for electricity. They're driving these systems with atmospheric electricity. These are antennas. And then when you look at them, you go, yeah, these are fractal antennas, very standard fractal antenna designs, and then they're hooked together in interferometers, cross dipole antennas. There's 6 types of antennas in this complex, but we're dealing with extremely advanced technology here in design. But back to the point, I believe that these were designed for us to discover. They were not discovered till 1941, till Paul Kosek, a PhD and a person interested in the designs, flew over them, in spite of the fact there's all kinds of people that go, hey, you can see them from a hillside over here. You can't. I've been there. You cannot see these from one point. You have to be well in the air to see it and to appreciate this complex, which is a couple hundred kilometers, square kilometers in extent. You cannot even begin to appreciate this until you're really high in the air.
Work with a young lady from Peru. I took your book in on my laptop and I showed it to her and I said, have you ever seen this? And her eyes got huge and she was very engaged by this. And she said, yes, you can only see this from a helicopter.
Great. And in the 1950s, Scientific America sent a team out there to study these. And their conclusion was, I'm sure they did what I call a quick and dirty. They go out there in an afternoon, they move some rocks, and they said, yeah, some indigenous people could have done this in a couple of afternoons, not a big deal. But when you understand what these are, and so that's been the scientific analysis of these ever since. When you understand what these really are, we're talking extremely advanced civilizations, plus the ability to point these and signal to other star systems. I'm not sure if you can pull up the what is known as the heron. It's got the long zigzag nose, and then
yeah, I'm not sure if I can find it because I'm working with thumbnail sketches here, unfortunately, and it's hard.
Right.
It's a
but anyway, let me just explain. The heron is the exact same antenna design as the 1950s TV antenna, which is a receiving antenna. And it's directional, very directional.
Yeah.
And so the heron, I mean, and it's kind of swept back. They're kind of like this. Let me try and explain it with my hands. There's a central pole, and then there are wings like this, and at the very back end, they fan out. That is exactly what the heron is. And so here are some fractal antennas. These are modern fractal antennas. There's some triangles, etc. And then there's a cell phone with a little fractal antenna right in the middle. That little splotch in the middle is one of the very early varieties of fractal antennas. Now they sit right in the corner of your cell phone. They're very small. They've gotten this down to extremely small sizes. But so anyway, what we're dealing with here, let's go back to the title. The Nazca and Palpa Lines, Mystery Solved. Ancient interferometer. Interferometer means they're all connected together. Ancient interferometer fractal antenna complex. So these are fractal antennas. In that monkey is a beautiful example. As long as you got this picture up, Randy,
this is a great picture.
I want to show you something here. Look up at the monkey's left arm. Okay, the dipole and the broken dipole antenna goes up to the right and then comes back down as a straight line. Now look where it crosses the monkey's left arm. It breaks. Now that's a circuit design consideration. If that would have gone through, it would short circuit off the monkey's left hand. It doesn't. Whoever did this knew that. This is electronic circuitry design, of which I've seen all kinds of these in my career on a printed circuit board, etc. But little things like that are so telling because that's a circuit design, antenna design consideration. Amazing. Now, what's very strange too, to me anyway, as a researcher, is that the tens of thousands of scholars who have been to this site to study them have not come up with even an inkling that that's what these are. And I believe that's because of compartmentalization. Archaeologists.
Exactly. I was just going to bring that up. Yeah, I was just going to say, this is what happened to science a long time ago as a result of the fact that we made everybody specialists and we segregated the disciplines from each other in such a way that our scientists basically became uber specialists. You've pointed out, and this is worth noting, that you basically did not pursue a PhD, that you sort of went off and pursued different things along the way. You know, I kind of think of you, and this is, I'm not blowing smoke here, but you're kind of the open source Indiana Jones in a lot of ways, because you've gone off into these interesting spaces that traditional scientists don't go. Talking, for instance, about Atlantis and Nibiru, and not stepping away from what I call the more fringy subjects. I mean, you've really been kind of bold in advancing certain things, James. And looking at this work kind of harkened back to, for me, a period of time of discovery in like the 1980s, when I discovered Robert Temple's work on the Sirius mysteries and started to delve into that as a serious entry into the world of extraterrestrial life and their impact on our civilizations. And that's where this really gets interesting. Is I know you advance a number of theories in the book about the origin of the antenna array and what they were using it for. What are we looking at here? In your best opinion, how do you think this functioned? Was this an extraterrestrial installation, or was this an advanced earthly civilization attempting to reach out beyond the boundaries of the planet itself?
Well, in the paper, I give 5 scenarios, and I think number 4 may be that it was a stranded civilization of beings from alien beings, and they built this to signal home, to call home like ET. But you wouldn't have done this complicated with all of the figures and everything else. You would not have done this if that was your only purpose. If you were either an indigenous race, very advanced in antenna design and electromagnetic design, you wouldn't have done this either if it was just for your own utilitarian use. This was done, in my opinion, by someone, whoever it was, whether they were Earthlings or aliens from another planet or whatever. This was done for us to find. Because look at what you have to understand to discover these. First of all, you got to be able to fly. These still to date would not really have been identified and discovered and studied. This would be just a road through the desert. No, there's some lines going off there, some paths over to the next trading city. So this, we had to fly to see this. Okay, now if you can fly, you're probably a couple steps away from space travel. Certainly you're going to be to the point where you might look at, you also have to understand atmospheric electricity, something that even modern science has refused to acknowledge. How basically stupid. I mean, modern science cannot explain how lightning occurs, how electricity comes shooting out the top and the bottom of clouds. Well, that's part of my work, is discovering that this is part of a larger electrical circuit in the solar system. And so modern science doesn't acknowledge that. So you have to understand atmospheric electricity and where it comes from. You have to then understand how antennas work, and that these are antennas plus fractal antennas, something we've only come to learn about in the last year, or last 10 years. So look at all of the technologies that have to be understood before you can look at these and go, this is what these are. Now we would be set with the task of, who are they signaling to? Who are they receiving signals from? What star system? This is a huge, difficult thing because the Earth precesses on its axis. 15,000 years ago, when they were put there, the Earth wasn't pointing in the same direction. And if we had pole shifts or something like that, then I mean that throws it off even further. There are all kinds of complications here in understanding what they were doing, who were they signaling to, but there's no question. There's absolutely no question that these were meant to signal other star systems. Now, that very large array that we saw, the Y out in the New Mexico desert, is capable of signaling other star systems. The Nazca Palpa complex dwarfs that in power and in complexity. Now, these are the black spirals in Africa. Yeah, but this is the monkey from Nazca. These are tremendously powerful antenna complexes. They dwarf the very large array complex out in New Mexico, which is one of our largest one. This is dwarfed. This is one figure. This is the size of the heron figure out in the middle of the Nazca Desert. And plus there's hundreds of these connected together out there. The Nazca Plains, if you look at this picture, look off at those mountains in the background, that's how big the Nazca Plain antenna complex is compared to this modern interferometer radio telescope. It's unbelievable. And then when you add in atmospheric electricity, a tremendously powerful electrical source, you have an antenna complex which is extremely powerful. And so this was not meant to, for you and I to talk on next door, which gets us over to what protocol would they using? For someone to listen, you don't just start, it'll be like two blind men talking sign language. They're not going to get very far. So you need a protocol.
Binary system? Is that what
we don't know? We don't know. We don't know. Maybe the various, like a piano, they could do chords, which would represent words. We don't know. We don't know what they were doing.
It leads me to wonder if we were to excavate this region more thoroughly, even using ground penetrating radar or something, do you believe we would possibly encounter something underground that would have maybe been base stations or large capacitors or control systems or something? Or do you think these are just gone?
Well, let's look at it. If you parked a car out on that desert today, as dry as it is, imagine what would be left in 10,000 years.
It's true, yeah.
Not much.
Not much.
Not much. And so when I'm up on these mounts, which are right on the plains there, and I'm looking at these and I'm looking at the lines, they all come up and they meet right at the same spot. I'm going, they're collecting atmospheric electricity and driving it out these antennas. And I'm looking around for any trace of anything, but given that period of time, literally there would be nothing left.
Now, what was the conductive aspect of this in terms of these patterns themselves? Do we think, first off, are they in rock? Are they in the ground? Is it a combination of substrate that they are actually embedded in?
What they did is they took the rocks and let me see. I have some. Do you have a picture of the rocks? I could bring one here just quick.
Yeah, I don't think we. Yeah, this is.
I'm going to quick grab one here.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Isn't this amazing? When you look at these, pictures, I'm fascinated by this. The scale of this is huge.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll bring James back in here.
Here we go. So this is an example of a rock that's on Nazca. They range from pea size up to this size, not much bigger than this. And they're strewn all over there. Now this is a very heavy little rock. It's iron, very rich in iron. So it's a reddish color. And the sand, the base is kind of a limestone sand and it's super fine. You can possibly see, I don't know if you could see here, but very super fine sand embedded in this rock. And that's the base. So you simply move these rocks and they pile them in very perfect little rows at the edge of this complex. And then they dug out a little trough, maybe a couple inches deep, maybe 5 to 10 centimeters deep. So that's what's there. nothing else. There's no trace of metal. There's no trace of anything. But if you're dealing with atmospheric electricity and a high metal content in these rocks,
Yeah.
there would be an induced transmission in the little paths that are around these. And if you look at antennas, that's exactly what
like a ferrite core line.
right. Because if you understand how electricity works, when current runs through a wire, when electrons are moving, they move to the outside of the wire. They don't travel down the middle of the wire. They travel around the outside. And so what we've got here are basically conductors, a couple hundred square kilometers of conductors running around this complex. And the ones, very interestingly enough, the ones in South Africa, the spirals, are associated, there's a lot of water construction there, dams and little valves to move and it appears that they have moved water into these little troughs in the Africa one. And there, oddly enough, there's water sources associated with these in the Palpa complex.
Up again, get you the picture of that, the African spirals.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm working with thumbnails here on the screen, so it's very difficult for me to tell sometimes.
Yeah. Now let's take a look at this one for a little bit. Look over on the left side. See how those lines squiggle back and forth, and then they come back, and then they hook into an antenna over here. These spirals are very.
This is elegant design. My God.
It looks like a printed circuit board.
Yeah, it does.
And then these are standard fractal designs. And if you look up at the very top left, there are dam systems which control water into this area, even though it's a dry area in Africa. But these are massive antenna complexes, and they look like a circuit board. On one of my previous postings on my webpage, I showed a printed circuit board in some of the artwork, which most people are familiar with. They've seen these in their computer or something like that. But this is the equivalent of a printed circuit board, but done, nobody knows. And now, interestingly enough, at the very end of the paper, I give a link, and it's to an excellent video. It's called, and I'll mention the name here, it's called Survivor 22. And they have a lot of very, very interesting videos dealing with ancients. They talk a lot about a super race that moved through planet Earth a long time ago, because the ancients talk about these blonde-haired, blue-eyed race that moved through in planet Earth, and that possibly some of these are related to that. So anyway, this is a very complex area. We don't know who did these. There's no real good historical record. But I would venture to say they were extremely advanced. The level of antenna design here is not only advanced, it has a whimsical sense of humor to it.
It does. It's very whimsical when you look at the creatures.
Yes. Yeah. And so let's imagine that they just built the rectangular arrays and the dipoles. You'd think, well, maybe this was for agriculture, maybe this was for or something else. But the fact that they built these figures, I believe that was for us to notice them, to take note. Well, these is pretty strange. Until some bozo like myself comes walking along and goes, hey, these are antennas. And this is an atmospheric collection point here.
Yeah.
And somebody someday was going to figure this out. Now what do you do? But look at what this does to history. This wipes what we've been taught about a history off the map. Because this was done before the Egyptian pyramids.
My word. Wow. That's incredible. Do you believe that this may be a vestige of one of the ancient civilizations, Atlantis, Lemuria? It doesn't seem like it's situated in a place to be consistent with Atlantis, but I don't know.
Well, Atlantis was all over the planet.
Yeah, it was.
And what I learned, and I am thoroughly convinced of this now, that Atlantis, the mother city, the seven-ringed city or whatever, is buried in the South China Sea. There was a physicist from Brazil a number of years ago, back in the probably 90s, that to put together a chart of all of the factors that had to exist to be Atlantis. And it turns out that the Pillars of Hercules were Krakatoa, and the sister volcano, and that's where the ships would enter when they came into Atlantis, which was a vast plain out there in what is now the South China Sea. And when it went under, it didn't go under far, because and the mariners used to say when they'd go in and try and find Atlantis, there were all these bogs of floating grass, which are literally still floating in the South China Sea. It's a peril to shipping in that area, but it's very shallow in that area. But Atlantis was all over the planet. It's apparently, and I don't know, I'm not a specialist in all of this, but Egypt and the pyramids were a colony of Atlantis. And a lot of the others, probably the pre-Olmec in, for example, Central America, were related to the Mayas, or were related to Atlantis. But, you know, putting history together, there's so many unknowns here. We're just starting to scratch the surface, but the one thing you can say is that the history we've been taught ain't true, could not possibly be true at all.
Yeah.
At all.
We're a mystery to ourselves, aren't we? We really don't know much about ourselves and our past, and something like this just becomes such an intriguing depth of mystery about who we are as a race and what we have been in the past. I know you're very fond of saying that we are not the most advanced civilization that's ever existed. How does that change our current view of ourselves, in your opinion?
Well, okay, let's look at something here. The fact that Mars had atmospheres and oceans, the ancients talk about that, the blue planet Mars, and very clear that it had oceans and atmosphere. It was a water planet. And now there's a very simple fact that I've been talking about this on some of my recent radio shows, that if you take a 1G acceleration and you want to go to Mars, and you go halfway there and then you decelerate at 1G, it takes you 1 day to get to Mars. 1 day with a 1G acceleration. It takes 10 days to get to Pluto. And so this is a very simple technique. It takes about 6 years to get to the nearest star system. You go 1G acceleration until you get up to 3/4 the speed of light. You cruise for the interim, and then you brake at 1G, negative 1G, as you cruise into the star system. And it literally, when you figure it out, it takes about 6 years to get to Alpha Centauri. It takes about 11 years to get to Sirius. And so let's take a 1G acceleration model going to Mars. A 1 day, you take a train trip for a 1 day, and you go out to someplace. You know, and so it's not that big a deal. What we've been handed from NASA is a line of pure baloney with the space shuttle and everything else. That's not the way to go into space.
Yeah.
And so let's look at atmospheric electricity. When I designed my propulsion systems in the 1980s, and I went to military meetings, I had proposed these at military, out at the military aerospace industry. My idea was absconded with, but the entire point here is that with atmospheric electricity, that electrical column provides a magnetic field, and you can literally ride it out into outer space with an electromagnetic propulsion system, no inertial propulsion required, no jets or rocketry involved. And so then you ride the basically talk I gave in 2004 at the UFO Congress in Laughlin, Nevada. It was called Electric Highways to the Stars. And I talked about the propulsion systems. Oddly enough, there were about 50 guys from NASA in the military there, including physicists from nuclear submarines and everything else. So anyway, but literally you can ride these electric rivers between the planets and to the stars with electric propulsion systems. One of them is passive. It doesn't require any onboard nuclear power plant. But at any rate, the point is, these technologies in my book, Atlantis to Tesla, the Colburn Connection, I actually give the design. It was printed in the IEEE magazine peer-reviewed journal in 1986. But with this technology, you didn't need all of the modern things. You don't need computers. All you needed was some metalwork, some ability to work with glass, which is fairly simple. And that was it. That was it. And the
Basic
hydrogen,
material science, basically.
yeah, and hydrogen fusion process, which is ball lightning. Once you get the ball lightning going, you put a glass tube in one side and out at the edge of the other side, and you have a battery. And so with a direct current, very high direct current through these tubes. And so the glass tubes, you run the electric current through them, pushes against the magnetic field, and that's the propulsion system. So anyway, the point is you didn't need all of this super modern technology that we have today to simply go into outer space.
Do you think we've been out there a lot longer than we've been told?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think that, what's going on at the upper levels of the world today, I don't know. It's pretty strange what's going on this planet, that we live on is, totally bizarre. But I would say that a lot of this has been kept from us.
Yes.
I'm a firm believer that we're living in a tier 2 world of science that's pawned off on us. I call it flat earth science that's pawned off on the public.
Oh, God, don't go there.
No.
No, that's a subject that wow. Yeah. Flat earth science.
But anyway, it's I call it simple science, silly science. It's been pawned off on us. The space shuttle. Every 1.5 years they have a launch, and everybody's supposed to go, wow. That is not the way to go into space. NASA's talking about going to Mars in 20 years. That's a big smoke screen to keep everybody down here. Exactly. That's all that is.
We are out of time for this show,
no.
James McCanney. This was just a ride and a half tonight. Amazing material. Those of you who are watching, the website is somewhere down on the corner throughout the course of this video. Go there. Buy some books, look at the water filters, listen to the radio show, and get connected with this information. We'll be back next week. We have a pretty interesting show coming up. I won't open the box now. I'll let you guess what it is. We'll be back next week on OffPlanet TV. I'm Randy Moggins. The truth is out there. It's inside you. Keep looking for it. We'll be back next week. Good night.